From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
Welcome into the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your temporary host, Andre Johnson Jr., joined by the man we have been asking to get in here for a while.
Please.
We finally got Fox 8 Sports Director Juan Kincaid into the studio with us. Now, before we get into everything, make sure to like, share, review. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit that little bell, get the notification every time we post an episode so you get that fire content. That's my Sean Fazan impression. Juan, you're getting back from vacation today, man. How was vacation?
It was good, just wasn't long enough. But you're reminded when you're on vacation that start of Saints training camp is around the corner.
Oh, yeah.
So enjoy it while you can.
Yeah, the Saints on vacation right now, and they're part of our big picture topic today. We'll get into some Pelicans later. They're in a very active part of their offseason, but we got to start with the Saints.
Why not?
Right now, Sean is in the middle of something he calls his Ranking the Saints countdown.
Yes,
he goes from 20 all the way down to 1, ranking the best players on the roster. He's gotten through 20 to 11, so this week the top 10 starts.
Yeah.
So we're in a ranking mood, Juan. We're going to talk about our top 10 most important Saints on the roster.
Because I think most fans out there, and most people can say we know what the number 1 and number 2 guys are, but which order do you have them in? And this was harder for me to make up than I thought it would be outside of the regular Derek Carr and stuff like that. There are a lot of important pieces on this Saints roster that if they all do their job this year, maybe we're talking about a playoff football team, but if 1 or 2 of them don't play up to expectations, it could be disastrous for the team.
Exactly. And Sean even said, this was probably the hardest year he had making the countdown. And his number 1, I've seen his top 10. I'm going to keep it secret for now, but his number 1 surprised me.
Yeah.
His number 1 and my number 1 might not necessarily be the same, but we'll count down 10 through 6. So what's your 10 through 6 on your list?
Number 10, Paulson Adebo.
Okay.
Number 9, DeMario Davis, having a bounce-back year. Number 8, Trevor Penning, playing right tackle.
Okay.
Number 7, and I got him pretty low because in any other season he's pretty high, Taysom Hill. And number 6, a guy we haven't seen much from yet because he's still getting back from an injury, but one of the newest players in the team, Chase Young.
Perfect, and I understand that for sure. Again, we'll emphasize it's the most important Saints heading
players
into the year. Not necessarily the best now, but the most important. And one name that stood out to me in your list was Penning. Talk about how important he can be to this season.
Well, I think there's an expectation he's going to take a step forward by moving to the opposite side of what he was used to playing in college on the right side of that line. He was always a left tackle. Now he's going to the right side. He can help this football team immensely if he can play that position well and consistently. That's going to be an important part because on the other side you got Talise Fuaga, who they are depending on him to protect Derek Carr's blind side. So Penning, what can you do by changing positions and giving a breath of fresh air over there? A brand new start for him. Maybe that's what he needs to get on the football field because make no mistake about it, he needs to be on the field. You have to find out what you have there. And Dennis Allen said as much last season in the offseason that it's our fault, as in the coaching staff, we didn't prepare him well enough to be starting right by now. So they're hoping that the change of position for him will get him on the football field and fill a huge need along the offensive line.
And another name that stuck out, a guy who we haven't gotten to see play yet, but a lot of people are excited for, it was the marquee free agent signing, Chase Young.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. We know the potential is there. We know what he did in college. We know what he did in the early part of his still young career. And the Saints have a huge need at defensive end. I feel like we say that every year. They get a guy in the first round, he doesn't pan out, he's no longer here, or whatever the case may be, or the guy can't stay healthy and Peyton Turner. So Chase Young comes in, and the belief was that when they signed him, they knew about the injury issues. They knew about him needing some time in the offseason to get ready to come into training camp, hopefully ready by training camp. So they were okay to take a chance on that because they know if it pays off, this could be a huge pickup for this football team in a need that they have every year. Because, again, on the opposite side is Cam Jordan, who's not getting any younger, and his production has dipped, and he's not playing every snap anymore. And Chase Young, you're hoping that Chase can pick up where Cam leaves off.
Right, and as I look at my 10 through 6, we've got a lot of the same names.
Okay.
My number 10 was Carl Granderson.
Okay.
Because I think Carl Granderson is someone
Good call.
who does not get enough credit for what he did last year. Carl Granderson, in a year where the Saints needed somebody to rush the passer because Cam Jordan had one of his worst seasons since his rookie year, Carl Granderson really stepped up. He led the team in sacks. He was a big piece of that defensive line. Number 9, I've got Eric McCoy.
Okay.
And you touched on the offensive line and talked about, really the youth that you've got on there, relying on Penning on one side, Taliese Fuaga on the other side.
He's been the steady guy in there, hasn't he?
He is your consistency in the middle. He's your veteran guy. He's the one who can really help bring it together. He's consistent, started 17 games last year. He's a guy who you're going to need if that offensive line, which is the scariest unit if you're a Saints fan right now.
You're right.
You want that to work out.
Yeah.
Number 8, I've got the Honey Badger. Tyrann Mathieu.
I thought about him too.
I went back and forth where to put him.
Yeah.
4 interceptions, tying the team lead last season. He's going to be back there presumably with Jordan Hawkins, a young player. So seeing how those two kind of go back and forth will be interesting. 7, a guy who you had on the list, Paulson Adebo.
Okay.
4 interceptions as well. 18 pass breakups, leading the team, and that's actually 3rd in the entire NFL. And I feel like last year he came into his own because if you remember at this point last year, we were talking about Adebo versus Alante, who would kind of be that cornerback too. Yeah. And last year, Paulson Adebo really secured that spot. And when I think about Paulson Adebo, I think of at one point you got to get ready for life without Marshawn Lattimore.
You had to be ready without him last year.
Exactly.
He hardly made it on the football field, and that was even more pressure on Adebo. We all wondered if Adebo would crack over there. Could he handle the pressure of being the number 1 guy? I thought he did pretty well last year.
Definitely. We talked about Granderson. Granderson, one of the best players on the defense last year. Yeah. Adebo, also one of the 3 or 4 best players on your defense. And number 6, another guy you had, Taysom Hill, because I value his versatility so much. 4 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns. Yeah. He had a passing touchdown to Juwan Johnson against the Bears. He can do a little bit of everything, and he's going to be in a new role this year. He's been really working with the fullbacks and running backs in minicamp and OTAs, so we'll see kind of where he falls in this Kubiak system, but wherever he falls, Taysom Hill's a guy who can do things that really nobody else in this league can do as a whole package.
You're right. I want to go back to one that you mentioned, Eric McCoy.
Right.
This reminds me of the days when Drew Brees was here. We always talked about the quarterback's worst nightmare is pressure right up the middle.
Yep.
So the Saints had to solidify the center position and build outwards. In McCoy, it's the same situation. Your best offensive lineman is at the center position. Your most consistent offensive lineman is at the center position. They've got to shore up that area first so that Derek Carr can have success. If they can't block the point of attack with McCoy leading the way, they won't have success on offense. I don't care who all is on the offensive side of the ball. If you can't protect the quarterback at the point of attack, and Eric McCoy does that as well as anybody in the league, if he continues to play that way this next year, then they'll have some success there.
Definitely. And listening to Jason Kelsey, the recently retired Eagles center, you really realize how many calls when it comes to blocking schemes the centers really make.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got a lot of young guys. You've got, assuming that the offensive line stays how it was between OTAs and minicamp, you've got Penning, a young guy. You've got Fuaga, a rookie. And you've got Nick Saldiveri, too, a guy going into his second year who really didn't get to play this first year.
Yeah.
So that's 3 really young guys. And to have a consistent veteran, a leader, right in the middle making those calls, Eric McCoy is going to be huge for this team.
I don't think people understand quite how big of a deal this patched together offensive line is this year. When you think about the history of the Saints, the one area where they've always had depth and solid starting 5 with good depth behind has been the offensive line, and that has slowly leaked away. And here we are now with, 3 of the 5 starters, all new guys.
Yep.
You have so much unknown in that offensive line. Taysom Hill's a guy we both understand. Again, it's the most important players, not the best players on the roster. We both understand the importance of Taysom, but I think we both have him at 6 and 7 based on looking at other guys on this list and saying, this other guy needs to be better. And if this other guy is better, then he is the most important player on the list.
Absolutely.
So let's get to the top 5. What's your top 5?
Top 5, I'll count all the way down. 5 may be a surprise
Give me
to
5
some
through
people.
2.
5 through 2, okay.
Yeah.
We'll start number 5. I've got Marshawn Lattimore, a guy who, when healthy, is a top-tier corner in this league. The only problem is I have to say when healthy because he has not been healthy that often recently. But if Marshawn Lattimore can be healthy and on the field, the Saints would have one of the best cornerback units in the league.
You're right.
Number 4, Chris Olave.
Okay.
Because I think Chris Olave has something to prove this year. I want to see him become a true number 1 receiver in this league. I want to see him be able to be in a conversation with the CeeDee Lambs, the Tyreek Hills, the Jamar Chases, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams. I want him in that conversation. I want him to have a breakout type of season. Number 3, I've got Demario Davis, a guy who you had higher on your list, but to me, Demario Davis is probably the most consistent part of your defense. He's also in the middle. The middle linebacker is kind of the quarterback of the defense. Coming off a season where he had a career high in tackles. I think he had 121 total tackles on the season.
It still felt like a down year for him too, didn't it?
I think it was a down year in a way for a lot of the defense, but even when you compare him to the people around him, 121 tackles, he had 6.5 sacks from the middle linebacker position. That's second in the team behind Granderson. And I think him holding down the middle and being that quarterback is going to be so valuable for this team because when I think about players on that defense, we talked about Lattimore. We've seen Lattimore, I don't want to say replace, but we've seen Paulson Adebo step in and do a good job.
Yeah.
If Cam Jordan, for whatever reason, couldn't go, you've got a lot of people who can step in and do his job. Is there a guy on the roster who can step in and do what Demario Davis can do?
I mean, Pete Werner's had to before, not very much, but even his game went down a little bit last year.
Right.
I mean, that's a very thin area
for
the Saints. That's a concern area.
And then my number 2, I put Alvin Kamara because now if we're talking about the best, I'd probably have Alvin Kamara a little lower. Maybe around that number 5 area because he's coming off 2 of the worst years of his career. But if you're talking most important coming into this season, this Clint Kubiak system, he comes from that Kyle Shanahan tree. Yeah. It's all about running the ball. And we saw what he was able to do for Christian McCaffrey, a guy who has been compared to Kamara in the past. And if Alvin Kamara can really get into this, well, first you got to figure out the contract situation, but when he can get on the field and really get into this Kubiak system, he could be the most dangerous weapon that this team has. So that's my 5 through 2.
It's like we looked at each other's paper on this one because at number 5, I got Marshawn Lattimore.
Okay.
If he can stay healthy,
right,
that does so much for this defense. Him, Adebo on the other side. You know, it's easier to play defense when you got 2 lockdown corners.
For sure.
Can make the defense. You can start rushing more, blitzing more. And number 4, Chris Olave. My question with him will be, he's going to command double teams.
Yeah.
Because you've got other guys at receiver that are unproven. I'm thinking of Rashid Shaheed.
Yep, and whoever wins that
whoever
third
else.
Receiver.
We talked about the youth on the offensive line. It don't get much younger than that receiving core, what's behind Chris Olave, and he's, 3rd year in the league now?
Yep.
So there's so much unproven in that receiving room outside of Olave. If I'm a defense, I'm saying, you know what? I'm going to take away Chris Olave and make one of these other young guys beat us.
Especially since you're hurting at tight end, too, right now.
Absolutely, especially because of that. Number 3, I have Talise Fuaga.
Okay.
The
I
rookie.
like it.
Not the best player, but the most important player. Why? Because he is guarding Derek Carr's blind side.
Yep.
As a really first-time left tackle because the majority of his snaps were at right tackle. He says it's no big deal, just the other sideline. We're going to find out because those right defensive ends don't play in the NFL. This isn't college ball anymore. Can he protect Derek Carr's blind side? If he can, then A+ for the Saints. If the Saints have to chip over there a lot of times because he can't get the job done, that's going to be a problem. My number 2, Alvin Kamara.
Right.
My question with him is more so off the field. Is he going to be at training camp on time? This contract situation, he wants more money. Has he earned more money? No. Not the last 2 years he hasn't, but he wants to get money in the neighborhood of Christian McCaffrey the money. What's Christian done over the last couple of years? A lot more than Alvin Kamara. He's earned the money. Alvin has not. We talk about it a lot of times in the office about AK doesn't make guys miss as much anymore at that second level. He's not outrunning players to the end zone anymore. He's not doing a lot of things now that he did 3-4 years ago.
Definitely.
And that's the concern with me. So if Alvin Kamara can get back to the AK of 3-4 years ago, then the Saints offense takes off.
Yep.
Takes the pressure off.
It's really a lose-lose situation right now for these two sides because if you're Alvin Kamara, your leverage is limited to a degree because you can't really sit out.
Yep.
At his age, he's already seen
I don't
as
think
an
he
older
has
running
leverage.
back.
This is where Sean and I disagree. I don't see the leverage he has, and Sean's like, yeah, he does, because no one else on the roster, running back-wise, can do what he does. But he hasn't done anything the last 2 years.
That is true, but we did get to see Jamal Williams. It was a short sample size, but we saw him as the starter when AK was suspended last year.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything.
And the rookie,
Kendre Miller, he's still an unproven commodity.
Yeah.
So the Saints right now, they were expecting Alvin Kamara to be here. So they're not really built to run the ball without AK right now. So the Saints would be in trouble. AK is not in a position to where he can sit out.
Yeah.
So it would behoove both sides to get in there and figure this thing out before training camp because Alvin Kamara still has to learn a new offensive system.
I agree. And so if there is any leverage that AK has, is that there's not much else in terms of options on your bench. But I will say this, and I've been saying this for the last 5 years, running backs are not as valued now as they were 5 years ago. You don't see these running backs getting these huge monster contracts anymore because you can go find a running back off the street that's serviceable if the rest of your offense is playing well. The problem with the Saints is they're down a tight end. They're light in the running back room. They're light in the wide receiver room. This offense does not scare you with Derek Carr being your quarterback. Their offensive line is questionable with 5 guys, 3 of them new starters. I mean, there are so many unknowns on this football team in important situations. So, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with Alvin Kamara. If I'm the Saints, I'm not moving. I'm saying either show up to training camp or you don't. We'll move on without you. That's just me. Would you move on without Alvin? Would you give him a new deal?
It would be tough, but if I would not put myself in a position to jeopardize the team down the line because remember when March started and we were talking about, man, the Saints are over the cap. They got to clear $100 million to get under the cap. The reason they were in that position is because of the big deals that they gave aging players.
Yep.
You're slowly starting to get from under that era. You don't want to do it again. You want to learn from some of the mistakes you've made in the past. So I certainly wouldn't break the bank for Alvin Kamara. There's room to where these sides can meet in the middle. Maybe you're not getting a Christian McCaffrey deal, but what about a Joe Mixon deal? $9 million a year instead of $18 million a year. Can we meet somewhere between there?
Yeah.
And if they can do that, I think it'll be best for both sides. Now, we did 5 through 2.
Yeah.
Number 1, if you're talking most important, that's obvious. We got to go with the quarterback, Derek Carr.
I don't know if he's your best player, but he is your most important player because if Derek Carr doesn't have a better season than last year, these other 9 guys don't matter.
Yeah.
He has to be better. He has to be better than what he's been as a pro, which is a 500 average quarterback who's been to 1 playoff game in his career, and he lost that game when he was in Vegas. I've said so many times, people complained about Drew Brees toward the end of his career having a noodle arm. I think 99% of the Saints fans would take Drew Brees over Derek Carr now, only because they know what Drew is giving them, an accurate quarterback. Derek Carr, just because it's new doesn't make it better. Right. But we need Derek Carr to be better. I think he understands he has to be better. But, man, they've got a lot of challenges around him to be better. The offensive line has to be good. They have to be solid. They got to protect him. Alvin Kamara has to run the ball better. I mean, all these things have to happen for Derek Carr to be better. Play action pass, that's when he operates at the best. So the offensive coordinator has to put him in a better position to be successful. That's what they didn't do last year. So while Derek Carr can have a better season statistically wise speaking, the offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, has to put Derek Carr in a better position to be successful. Put that guy in more play action because he plays his best football that way.
Right, and one thing about the play action, for the play action to work,
you got to
be able to run the ball.
Got to be able to run the ball.
And that's, Derek Carr, he's in a situation where this is a big year for him with the Saints, but this is a big year for him in his career because if he has a bad season and the Saints don't succeed league-wide, people might stop looking at him as a guy who's like, maybe Derek Carr isn't a guy who we can bring in and start, and maybe he can get our team to the playoffs if he has a bad year this year with the Saints. And it kind of sucks for Carr because he's not in a great situation right now. The offensive line is suspect. His number 1 running back is in a contract dispute, and there's not much behind him. You've got Olave, solid receiving option. Your number 2 receiver is Rashid Shaheed, and a lot of Saints fans, they love Rashid Shaheed. But when you look at some of the wide receiver 2s in this league, he's in the lower half of that. He's not a Jalen Waddle. He's not a Devontae Smith. He's not a Chris Godwin. So Rashid Shaheed has a lot to prove. And then wide receiver 3-wise, A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson, Equanimous St. Brown, Bub Means. So you got a lot of unproven type receivers around Derek Carr. And your number one tight end's down.
Yeah.
Your best guy might be an undrafted rookie in Dallin Holker.
Which is a lot of unknown with that because he's great in college.
Right.
But he didn't go drafted. So he didn't get drafted. So I mean,
exactly. So Carr's in a tough spot this year for sure. But if we're talking about most important Saints, he's got to be your number one.
Yeah. In fact, I think your quarterback is your most important player every year.
Right.
Because without a quarterback playing well, team doesn't usually play well.
Definitely. Now, you talk about quarterback. As we shift to the Pelicans side of things, the Pelicans just traded for a new quarterback of their offense. Point guard DeJounte Murray, the Pelicans making the trade with the Atlanta Hawks, sending over Larry Nance Jr., Dyson Daniels, E.J. Liddell, and 2 first-round draft picks. They also drafted Yves Missi, the center out of Baylor, Antonio Reeves, the guard out of Kentucky. How are you feeling about the Pelicans offseason so far?
I like the draft. I think Missi's a good pickup. He's young. He's raw. He's an athlete. He can jump out the building. He can block shots. And he gives you a little bit of offense. Not very much. But I'm not looking at my center and saying, I need you to give me 15 points a game. I've been saying I want this team to have a guy that can rim protect and rebound, be a threat around the rim when offensive guys come in there. And I think Missi will build into that. He's already shown some ability to do that. The shooter at Tennessee, he can shoot.
Oh, Reeves?
I remember watching Reeves play my Tar Heels, and he ate them up. I like the fact that they went and got themselves a shooter. Now, Jordan Hawkins is also a shooter who didn't see a lot of playing time last year. I'd like to see more from him this year. I hope Willie Green gives more rope to him and lets him play a little bit more, get more into the rhythm of the offense. I think Reeves will be the same way. I think he'll be a guy they'll bring along slowly and then see what he's got. And I like what they did in the draft. I want them to do more in free agency. DeJounte Murray jumping to get him early on, I like that. It addresses a huge need for you, gives you a little more size in that backcourt, which makes me understand why now Trae Young was not going to be a Pelican.
Yeah.
You could not put Trae Young and C.J. McCollum in the backcourt because we saw in that playoff game series how Oklahoma City just every time they got C.J. McCollum down low, they put the ball down there, and he could not stop running water. He's not a defensive basketball player. So you couldn't put Trae Young down there either because then you're really, really small. So I like DeJounte Murray. I think it's a good two-way guard. I think he gives the Pelicans a guy that can distribute, a guy that can score in the mid-range, who can also knock down threes. He's a dangerous player, and he makes the basketball team better. But they can't stop there when it comes to free agency. They have to address also not only some roster holes, but probably to me the most important position that needs to be addressed is at center.
Definitely, because going into this offseason, we would have said the two biggest needs for the Pelicans, they need a center and they need a playmaking point guard.
Yeah.
They got that. They bring in Yves Missi, a defensive athletic type guy at Baylor. You bring in DeJounte Murray, one of the few playmaking point guards left. He averaged, because he kind of played a little shooting guard in Atlanta, but in his last year in San Antonio, where he was an all-star, 21 points, 8 rebounds, 9 assists. These days, a lot of point guards, you see Luka, who can give you 30. Gilgeous-Alexander, who can give you 30. Jamal Murray, a scorer. Trae Young, a good passer, but he's also going to give you 30. DeJounte doesn't need to go out and score 30 every night. He's happy with giving you 10-plus assists. I think he'll fit into this puzzle. Now, the biggest piece of the puzzle that you have to figure out as you look to improve this roster, it seemed like the idea of trading Brandon Ingram was almost a definite a week or two ago. Now that you make this trade, do you still trade Brandon Ingram for a center, or do you kind of let it ride with who you've got right now and look to improve that position another way?
No, I trade for a center because what you have right now is not enough. You got Larry Nance went away in the trade. That was your backup center. And we saw last year at times, especially in the playoffs, when the Pelicans played teams that had big athletic guys down low, the Pelicans struggled to rebound the ball. They struggled to defend at the rim. As much as I love Jonas Valanciunas, he was not a great defensive center, and he had no mobility to guard anybody. Couldn't guard anybody on the wing. Larry Nance would be brought in because he's more mobile, but you lose that size as a 6'8" guy. And so I think if it's me, I'm looking to move Brandon Ingram and seeing what I can get for him if I can get me a quality center. I think there's ways to do it. I don't think you're going to find anybody that's a free agent now that's worth bringing in here that makes it an equal value. But I think there are guys out there that, with the right package, you can trade for him.
This is where we disagree because I look at this lineup right now as it is.
Okay.
Center is definitely a problem because you're probably starting Yves Missi. Now, if Yves Missi as a rookie can give you what maybe Derek Lively did the Dallas Mavericks in his rookie year, you're in a great position. But as I look at this lineup, I'm putting CJ as the sixth man because you got to have DeJounte Murray at point guard. You can't bench Herb Jones. He's at your 2. Right now, you've got Brandon Ingram. You put B.I. at the 3. Zion Williamson at your power forward position at the 4. And then you've got your center position where you can put Yves Missi there for right now. Coming off the bench, C.J. McCollum, Trey Murphy, and Jose Alvarado. A scorer, a shooter, and a playmaker that can play defense. Those 8, they've got a lot of teams in the NBA who cannot bring out a roster or a lineup that's that deep. You've got a lot of depth. You've got a lot of scoring. You've got a lot of versatility in those top 8 guys. And you still have Jordan Hawkins, your first-round draft pick from last year. I love the scoring that unit gets you. And if you remember at the end of the season, the Pelicans had that press conference. Brandon Ingram talked for about 11 minutes. And one of the most interesting things he said, they asked him about, the lineup and the three-point shooting and how it struggled at times. And he essentially said he feels like they struggled shooting threes because they didn't have a playmaking point guard. Yeah. He threw it back to the days with Lonzo Ball and Drew Holiday and talked about how back then they got a lot of catch-and-shoot threes because you had playmakers like Lonzo and Drew who could find guys and create open threes. They didn't have that last year, so they had to create a lot of their own threes, and that's where you saw a lot of the struggles. Yeah, I think that having DeJounte brings the best out of Brandon Ingram, can bring the best out of Herb, can bring the best out of Trey, can bring the best out of Zion in a pick-and-roll type situation. And just seeing all of those guys, I would have to try to figure out the center position another way that doesn't involve trading Brandon Ingram if it was me.
Yeah, all good points, and I would agree with you on a lot of that. And I think it makes me think back to when they had the end of season press conference, and one of the questions that was asked to David Griffin, the executive vice president, was, do you think this team needs a more natural point guard? And the first thing out of his mouth was, no, we need a more of a playmaking point guard. And I didn't quite understand what the difference was a little bit until I thought a natural point guard would be Chris Paul at this point stage of his career. He's going to give you more assists than points most times. Every now and then he'll be a great scorer, but he's past that prime. A good scoring point guard, all-around point guard is DeJounte Murray. And he's more of what the NBA is now. You don't have those true point guards that are leading offenses. I mean, if you go back to the Golden State championship teams, I mean, Steph was a scoring point guard.
Yeah, he was essentially a shooting guard masquerading as a point guard.
Exactly. They didn't have a natural point guard on that team. So, I mean, I like what you're saying about what the roster would be. I am just kind of the old school ilk in that I think this team, I've watched this team too many times get dominated down low, second and third opportunities because they can't grab a rebound. They can't stop anybody inside. I mean, I made a list of I went online and found the best available centers still available in free agency. Yep. Guys like Daniel Theis and Xavier Tillman, James Wilson, JaVale McGee. I mean, these are all guys that aren't Bismack Biyombo. Yeah. These are all guys that are not starting. None of these guys you would say, I'll give you Brandon Ingram for that guy.
Definitely.
There better be some and I don't even want Brandon Ingram going anywhere for a guy and picks. I don't want picks. I want a guy that's coming in and improving. So Jared Allen has been a guy that's been on the Pelicans' radar since last year. And it felt like they were getting closer and closer to make that move. But I'm hearing more about Lauri Markkanen. Like, would you take a Lauri Markkanen?
I would take a Lauri Markkanen.
Or Brandon Ingram.
Brandon Ingram's a fringe all-star type player. Markkanen was an all-star last year. 6'11".
And Markkanen's been a consistent scorer. I mean, he's averaging 23 and 8. Allen's averaging 16 and 10. But how about this one? Walker Kessler.
I would be okay with that because he's young
Yeah.
And he's the guy who, when the Jazz moved Rudy Gobert,
Yeah.
they did it because they felt like he could be a younger, better Gobert, and he's a great paint defender.
Former Tar Heel, then went to Auburn and played there. I mean, obviously, right now.
I'm about to say, as soon as you said former Tar Heel, I said, oh, yep, that's how we got him.
7-1, 8 points per game, 7 rebounds per game, shoots 65% from the floor. So he can give you some offense, but he's a shot blocker. He was that way at Carolina. He was that way at Auburn. He wouldn't cost you nearly as much. And I don't think you'd have to give up Brandon Ingram to get him. I think you can give up another piece and also draft stock.
That would be perfect if you can get a center like that without giving up BI. Because we talk about, you mentioned the Warriors. I think back to the Warriors during their dynasty. They were most dangerous when they brought out that small ball lineup. They used to call it their debt lineup.
Yeah.
The Pelicans would have a heck of a small ball lineup right now if you've got DeJounte Herb, B.I., Trey, and Zion. Yeah. Now, obviously, that unit can't play 30 minutes together, but in spurts, bringing those guys out together, that would be a really tough situation for any defense to stop.
I will say this. The one thing that concerns me is about all the depth they lost in the backup players, losing Najee Marshall, losing Dyson Daniels, losing Larry Lance Jr. I mean, those were important pieces. And those three, a big reason why this team won 49 games last year. Not because of the starting five, but because we couldn't always rely on that starting five being on the court together. The big three weren't very good when they were on the court, but when you sprinkled in some of those bench players, that's when this team was playing at its best. I'm concerned about how they're able to fill those holes on the bench. Will most of those players come out of the Summer League team? Or will they have to just go back into free agency and find some quality depth there? Because, I mean, I see what you're saying with the starting five and what's coming off the bench there, but you still don't have a big guy coming off the bench. You don't have a power forward coming off the bench that can give you minutes down there, or a center, unless Misi's your center coming off the bench and you find a starting center. So, I know Misi could probably fill the void and help out a little bit, but you've still got size issues, not just at center, but at power forward coming off the bench in your second five.
That's true, because right now the only other big you have other than Yves Misi is Jeremiah Robinson Earl.
Who?
Yeah, so he didn't get a lot of minutes last year.
He wasn't a bad player, but he was a end of the bench role player.
Right. And now Summer League actually starts for the Pelicans this week. Friday they'll take on the Timberwolves. They also will play the Kings and the Spurs. They've got 4 games in Summer League. What are you most looking forward to as we head into that?
I think what I'm looking forward to most is seeing Jordan Hawkins and how he's progressed, and also seeing Yves Misi and seeing how he does against first-year NBA competition.
Right.
It'll be stepped up a little bit from college, and just to see his athleticism, see his presence around the rim. And I'll also be looking to see what guy on this roster will be number 13, 14, and 15 on the Pelicans bench, if any of them. Or will they have to go into free agency and find some guy that's got some experience and can give them more than what they got on their roster. So those are the things I'm looking forward to.
Same here. I want to see the 2 shooters, Jordan Hawkins, who obviously with the Pelicans and the other guys on the court, he doesn't necessarily have that green light. He'll have that green light in Summer League. Yeah. You've got Antonio Reeves, the other rookie that they traded into the second round to draft. I'm interested to see how effective he can be as a shooter. I believe he led Kentucky. Mm-hmm. He was their leading scorer.
Yeah, good player.
So I want to see him active. And then also, like you said, Yves Misi. I want to see how mobile he. I know that he's an athletic guy. I know that he can block shots, protect the paint. I want to see him in the pick and roll. Yeah. I want to see teams kind of try to get him on that switch and see if he can, obviously not every center can do it every time, but can he hang with guards? Yeah. Can he hang with maybe a small forward on the switch? That's kind of what I want to see out of Yves Misi, to see how versatile of a defender he can be, because that was the problem with Jonas.
I agree.
If he was in the paint, he was great, but you put Jonas in the pick and roll and get him out the paint, that's where the problem arose, and that's why he was off the court a lot of times in late game situations.
I want to see Yves Misi be a step above Jackson Hayes.
Yes.
On offense, coming off the pick and roll, going in for alley-oop dunk, that's going to be his role. But I want to see him be a better defender. I thought Jackson should have been a better defender in Pelicans colors.
Definitely.
He disappointed in that way. He's more focused on his offense and knocking down three-pointers, but I thought he should have been a better defender because he has the hops for that. I'd like to see Misi be a better defender than Jackson, but also the same kind of rim runner as Jackson was on offense.
Definitely. So we've gotten through our Saints, gotten through our Pelicans. You got anything to add?
No, I mean, it's almost training camp, and we're going through the summer here, and I mean, it's it's almost time for things to heat up with training camp. So I'm looking forward to that. And then after that, I mean, once we get it halfway through the season, then the basketball season starts. So everything's kind of running all together.
I've got one more question for
yeah.
you. You mentioned training camp. You're part of the unit that will be sending to California for Saints training camp. You've been to a couple Saints training camps on the road.
Yeah.
What's the biggest difference for them being on the road compared to them being right there on Airline
Well,
Drive?
I think I've been to almost as many training camps on the road as they've been at home, because they also did training camp at Nichols, training camp at Southeastern, training camp in Jackson for a few years, obviously training camp in West Virginia for a few years. So one thing I will say about that, it is a camp setting that they can't get here. Mickey Loomis and I talked about this at the Greenbrier the last year of training camp there. And he told me, he said, look, Juan, I love bringing the team out of town because it's all about football. Yep. There's no family distractions. There's usually better weather, more conducive to getting more workouts. And in West Virginia, we're waking up to 50-degree temperatures in the morning, and it doesn't get above 70 because we're in the middle of the mountains. They're doing 2 workouts a day. The second one's a walkthrough, but the temperatures are just conducive to playing football.
Yeah, it's
and
about
staying
98
healthy
down here.
Yeah. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most, is them getting out of town. And I know they would love to make this more than a 1-year deal. That it is a 1 year right now. But I know that front office would love to take this team out of town every year, have a locked-in place to go to, and call that camp. Yeah, the Saints fans will miss it here, but if it ends up translating into them playing better football and getting back to the playoffs, I think Saints fans will trade them going out of town for the summer for a football team back in the playoffs and competing and staying healthy.
That's true, because Saints fans, one thing about the Saints fans, they will show up.
They will show
up. I remember last year, training camp, it was 100 degrees
and they out there.
Plus, sold out, lining everywhere. And not every part of that is necessarily shaded or cool. They don't care. Saints fans will be there. So that's kind of the double-edged sword. You lose the fan interaction, the guys, because there will be a lot of guys who will stay after practice, sign autographs, take pictures, kiss babies, all of that stuff. But like you said, if they're out of town and they're winning 11, 12, 13 games, I don't think many people will complain.
No, they won't. But July 23rd, when it all gets underway. So looking forward to bringing it to you.
Yep, we are almost there. One last shout out to Paul Skeens.
Hey, how about that,
Major League Baseball All-Star teams announced today, and the rookie out of LSU is now the first #1 overall pick to make the All-Star game the following season.
It's amazing.
Paul Skeens making history as an All-Star.
Paul Skeens is that dude.
Yeah.
He was that dude when he walked on LSU's campus from Air Force, and we just didn't know it. But we learned very quickly.
Yeah, we know now.
We know now. And he's 5-0, 2.12 ERA, 78 strikeouts, something.
78 strikeouts in 10
ridiculous.
starts, the most strikeouts through 10 starts by any rookie.
I think Jay Johnson would hey, you got another year in eligibility? Come back in one more year.
You understand why he's looking for the next Paul Skeens now.
You do. Yeah. Jay Johnson, every guy he's recruited pitching-wise throws 100+. He got spoiled on Paul Skeens, throwing 100+. Said, you know what? If one guy can do it, maybe we can get another guy in here. But Skeens has been fantastic in the majors. He has looked the part since day one of stepping on the mound, striking out his first batter, and then going on from there. He's been fantastic. Congratulations to him.
Congratulations, Skeens. And like you said, we're looking forward to Summer League for the Pelicans, training camp for the Saints. We've got a lot to be excited for coming up in about 2-3 weeks. And that'll do it for this episode of the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast.
Will I get invited back again?
You are, this is an open door, Juan. You just got to let me know. I
had no idea.
Yeah, you just got to let us know.
Oh, okay.
You got to help us sell Madeline Adams. I've been trying to get Madeline Adams in here for a while.
Madeline Adams sells herself. I mean, when she's on the air, the ratings spike like crazy. So no, we'll get Madeline on more as well. 'Cause I know she loves talking about the Pelicans
and anything LSU.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is the special Juan Kincaid edition of the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. We'll try to get a Madeline Adams edition coming up. But in the meantime, join us next time on Overtime.